Hello, thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes for people to join the call. In the meantime, I just wanna remind you about the options that you have on Zoom. If you're new to Zoom, you can use the chat to enter some comments. We do recommend to use the Q&A section if you wanna ask questions versus using the chat. All right, we're gonna wait a couple more minutes. I guess in the meantime, while we wait for more people to join, I can start playing a quick video just to give a couple more minutes. So give me one sec.
A neighborway is the newest type of street in the city of Pittsburgh. A neighborway is a street where motor vehicle speeds and volumes are kept low to make it more comfortable for existing residents, while also making it safer to walk, ride a bike, and for kids to play. These traffic calming streets provide an alternate route to a major arterial road and have minimal impact on parking and the existing street layout. Whether you drive, walk, roll, or play, your street will be safer and your transportation options will improve. Neighborways create the connections toward a low-stress, all ages and abilities bike network. The route will include neighborhood traffic circles, wayfinding, and other traffic calming measures where appropriate.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. I see there's still more people coming. We got around 50, around 60 people almost joining us tonight. And again, if you're just joined, thank you so much. If you're new to Zoom, just remember to use the chat for entering any comments. We do encourage people to use the Q&A section to ask your questions. You might notice that since we're doing a different format this time, we're doing a webinar format. Last time we allowed people to see videos so everybody could actually see each other and then even like talk. So what we're doing this time is just more like a faster way to get like your questions, and this way we also respect everybody's time. So by having you enter your questions through the Q&A section, we'll be able to like answer them faster. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna wait maybe one more minute and then we'll start the presentation. Thank you. I see that Ned is asking a question on the chat. Yes, everybody will be able to see the questions. Participants will not be allowed to speak. Again, if you just joined, we're doing a webinar format this time. So what this involves is that we encourage you to use the Q&A section to ask your questions. So actually all the questions that you guys want to ask from now on, I will recommend using the Q&A section option instead. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see some options. We'll have the chat option, we'll have the Q&A option. We're not using the raise your hand option since we are not allowed people to speak. But this is just so we have a more smooth meeting and we respect everybody's time and we make sure that we answer as many questions as we can. So we can actually start in 15 seconds. Give me just 1 moment. All right, I think we can actually start.
All right, should I start, Ricardo?
Yes, please.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for attending tonight's presentation on the Reynolds Street Neighborway. I see we've got about 65 participants so far, nearly 100 registered, so hopefully we'll have a few more people join us. But again, thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kim Lucas. I am the Assistant Director for Planning, Policy, and Permitting for the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Next slide. I wanted to first begin our conversation tonight with an overview of our department's goals. So the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, otherwise known as DOMI, is one of the newest city departments. It's about 3 years old. And our goal and mission is to provide the physical mobility necessary for the social and economic mobility for the residents of the city of Pittsburgh. We aim to accomplish that mission through 5 goals, which you can see here. The number 1 goal that underlines all of our work is safety. We believe that no one should be seriously injured or killed while using our streets. In addition to that, we care about access. We want to make sure that every resident has access to fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes of their home, and that it doesn't require owning or using a car to make that trip within 20 minutes. We want to make sure that for those very short trips, those trips that are less than 1 mile, that they can be achieved, again, without a car. Not everybody has a car. When folks drive, that can lead to more congestion and associated public health concerns with air quality and other issues. And so we want to make sure that there are options available for the residents and visitors to the city of Pittsburgh. Our 4th goal has to do with finance. We know that, especially in uncertain economic times like right now, that costs are unpredictable for housing, for food, and for other basic goods. So we want to make sure that the combined cost of those goods, household, energy costs, housing, and transportation do not exceed 45%, regardless of how much money you make. And so what that means is that we are committed to making sure that there are affordable transportation options available for our residents and visitors. And finally, we want to make sure that our streets in the city of Pittsburgh reflect the pride and values of our residents. Next slide. So I will share in a few moments the process that we're in the middle of right now. But a lot of our work, including the conversation tonight, began in the planning phase. And one of our major plans that we're very proud about having released and finalized a few weeks ago is our Bike Plus Master Plan. This document is the first plan of its type that the city has had in 20 years. It proposes over 120 miles of new or improved connections to our bike network. It also identifies some miles for new trails and supportive policies such as bike parking and improving the connection between riding a bike and being able to connect to public transit. Next slide. This is a snapshot of where we are today. This is our existing bicycle network. As you can see, we've got a few major projects, the Allegheny Circle protected bike lanes, Penn Avenue protected bike lanes, and a wonderful connection of riverfront trails. But otherwise, the city is not very well connected. And so the goal of the Bike Plus plan was to make sure that regardless of where your point A is and where your point B is, that you would be able to get there safely and comfortably, regardless of your age or ability, using 2 or 3 wheels. Next slide. When fully built out, this is what we hope to see. This is what 120 roundabout miles of improved connections looks like. What this plan does is identify where we see gaps, as identified by those light blue wide arrows, that we don't know the specific route that makes the most sense, and also some places specific roadways where you see the narrower lines. Next slide. What the plan does not do is say what those narrow lines will become. It simply says that we know that a bike connection is needed from this origin and this destination. That's where this planning process that we're in the middle of comes into play. So on the top left, you'll see what is considered the premium gold standard of bike facilities. It's a trail. It's a multi-use path that's completely separated from automobile traffic. Generally, all cyclists, regardless of their age or ability, will feel comfortable using a facility of this type. As you move through the images to the right and eventually to the bottom right corner, you start to get to lighter touch solutions. So you'll see that we've got protected bike lanes, which use physical barriers, buffered bike lanes, which have a painted buffer as a barrier, the typical bike lane, of which you see many of in many cities, a sharrow, which is a shared use lane marking. And then finally, on the bottom right, you see a snapshot of what a neighborway could look like. So even though there's a speed hump that's in the photo of a neighborway tonight, that is not what's being proposed for the Reynolds Street project, and we'll go into those specifics. But I wanted to share with you the different options that we have in our toolkit to make those bike connections and those safety improvements, and talk a little more about how we go from a line on a map to a design. Next slide. So we've received a few questions about the Bike Plus plan because, as I mentioned, this is the first one we've had in 20 years. So the plan was under development for a number of years. We received hundreds and hundreds of points of feedback. We had online maps where folks were able to point at a line on a map and say, this really should be moved, or we want to see more or less of it. And we also had a series of open houses earlier this calendar year where we went around to 7 or 8 different neighborhoods where people could come out like you see here and give us feedback. This was actually taken at the shop in Homewood, which was one of 3 meetings that we had that were fairly close to the Reynolds Street project proposal. Next slide. And finally, Move Forward PGH. As you can see here, Move Forward PGH, which is our brand for the implementation of the Bike Plus plan, is a collaboration. It is a city project. I work for the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, but we have partners that are presenting with us tonight and that are helping us along the way. Those partners work for Bike Pittsburgh and for Healthy Ride. This is so that through, thanks Ricardo for waving, this is so that we're able to expand our reach, improve our outreach, and do more through a combination of grant funding and other sources to make sure that we're able to come out and talk to all the communities. This is a very ambitious plan that we have, 120 miles of new connections, with the hopes to rapidly implement the first half of those connections in the next couple years. And so we're trying to leverage as many sources of local community members as we can to be successful. Next slide. So again, we're in the middle of a process. We started with planning efforts. These were conversations with communities that yielded the lines on the Bike Plus plan map. These were other community groups that we participated in, and we've taken that feedback and we've moved into design. So tonight, what we're going to share with you is a design that incorporates that feedback through surveys, through small group engagement, through the previous large public meeting. And finally, our goal is to make it through construction. We hope by August of this year to move to construction for a number of projects that we know will improve the safety and connectivity of our residents within our city. Next slide. For Reynolds Street specifically, this is where we are. We have had a number of previous meetings, including the big public meeting that was, I believe, in June. We've met with local business stakeholders and the Point Breeze organization. This is our final large-scale public meeting. As I mentioned, there were nearly 100 registrants for tonight, where we promised to bring back to the community 60% or greater designs. And finally, we hope to get to phase 4 this summer, probably in August, of the installation of the designs that we're sharing with you tonight. Next slide. So again, we've had a number of different ways that we've tried to engage the community. So first, by dropping off flyers. I personally was at the PBO meeting, the Point Breeze organization meeting in March. We've made our fact sheet with some ideas and preliminary designs available online beginning in May. We've had a number of, they're not in-person meetings due to COVID, except for that very first one in March, but we've had a number of online stakeholder meetings and large-scale meetings, and we've had a survey that we've made available for since May. As you can see here from that survey that DOMI issued, we had nearly 200 respondents, 185 to date, and that the majority, as you can see, were positive or neutral about the project. So what we found by our research is that while there have been a number of questions which we hope to address tonight, and we hope that we've addressed a number of them through those prior meetings that we've had, we have seen a lot of support for the proposal that we will share with you this evening. Next slide. And another big question that we've received has to do with project funding. So the mix that you see here is a pretty typical mix, but I don't want to say it's the mix that we're going to have for every single project. We're able to achieve safety improvements through a number of ways and a number of funding mechanisms, including federal grants and through developers and new developments when we're able to make streetscape improvements. But for tonight's project, this is the general overview, where the Bike Plus plan and other programmatic components were already funded as part of the larger citywide planning process and through our capital budget. We received a large grant with some in-kind support of over $2 million. And that grant support is what has enabled us to hire our designer and actually make the design. So again, when I mentioned that we have nonprofit partners, in part that's because the city applied for and was awarded a large grant to help us with this work so that we could make our city budget go as far as possible. Next slide. Well, another question that we received had to do with why Reynolds Street. There's a lot of streets in this neighborhood. There's a lot of streets that make up the city of Pittsburgh. So why is Reynolds one of our first few, because it's one of many that we're doing, to receive this safety improvement? Well, through community engagement, we learned that it was the preferred east-west route in the bike network because of the street's conduciveness to biking already, with its relatively low volumes as a residential street and relatively low speeds, that we knew that it was already poised to be a really great connection, and we wanted to make it a wonderful connection. Next slide. Another question we received is why a Neighborway? I showed you a slide that had a lot of different options on it, from trails to protected bike lanes to normal bike lanes, and finally the Neighborway, which is the lightest touch option. This was selected based on looking at a number of data points. So you heard me mention that Reynolds Street already had lower speeds typically compared to, say, a highway or a major thoroughfare, and lower volumes. And so we knew that while there were safety improvements that were needed based on crash data, that we didn't have to do a whole trail. We also didn't have the space to do something like that. Whenever we're making design decisions, we not only have to look at community feedback and interest and safety data and speed data, we also have to think about the actual environment. And we knew from engaging with your community that parking is important. And so the proposal that we brought tonight does not remove a single legal parking space, because we knew that that was something that wanted to be maintained. We could have looked at a bike lane here, but we knew that that would have a negative impact on the provision of parking. We also wanted to make sure that the crossing improvements that you see tonight would serve folks of all ages and abilities. And we're currently collecting data on some of the interventions that we will talk about later on a nearby street on Euclid to make sure that what we're proposing will work in real life. Next slide. And I will go ahead and pass it on to Alyssa, one of our design engineers, to talk a little more about the design specifics of the Reynolds Street project.
All right, great. Thanks, Kim. So hi to all of my neighbors. I'm not sure if some of my immediate neighbors are on this call. I do happen to live in the Point Breeze neighborhood, so it's nice to work on a project within my own neighborhood for once. Just to talk a little bit through the design process. So one, to talk about the treatments, how they were selected, the data that's used to help inform the design and selection of those. And then I'll get into what we're proposing on Reynolds. So let's start with the traffic calming selection. So as Kim had explained, we went through this whole process to get to the point of this being named a Neighborway for the variety of reasons that she had mentioned. So from there, within each of those different categories, we have created a toolkit of different types of safety improvements that could be made. So what you're seeing on the screen here are the variety of improvements that are included in Neighborways. The top set are the ones that we are looking at for Reynolds Street specifically. So we're looking at curb extensions, neighborhood traffic circles. Just to be clear, those are mini traffic circles. So the one that most people are familiar with in front of the Frick is much larger than what these ones will be here. Wayfinding signage, and also shared lane markings. This will not include any speed humps or any of the flex post delineators, those reflective delineators that I think quite a few of you are familiar with. Next slide. Okay, so some of the factors that we use to make some of these decisions. So vehicle volume and speed. The current roadway geometry, which we know is 2 lanes with on-street parking. We looked at crash data to help determine if we should tweak any of the designs or make any enhancements to those based on experienced crashes, and also community input. So I'm going to just touch on some of that data a little bit here. Go to the next slide. All right, so we know that speed has a very big impact on safety and survivability of crashes for everyone, but in particular for pedestrians and bicyclists. So the image on the right there, you can see that if a pedestrian is hit by a vehicle traveling at 20 miles per hour, that one of those pedestrians out of 10 would not survive. If hit by a vehicle traveling at 30 miles per hour, 5 of 10 of the pedestrians would survive. And hit by a vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour, only 1 out of 10 pedestrians survives. And that is the average pedestrian. That's not counting those pedestrians that are more vulnerable. So thinking about younger children and also elderly pedestrians as well. Those survivability rates would definitely be impacted by age. So what we found here on the street is that the median speed is 26 miles per hour. So that doesn't feel too bad, right? That feels like this isn't much of an issue, but the problem is the outliers to that. So the 85th percentile speed, so the speed that the 85th percent of the vehicles going is 32 miles per hour. So we have a lot of drivers, a decent amount that are speeding on our roadways. And that might not seem too much of a big deal, but whenever you're trying to cross the street and someone runs through the intersection or is traveling that fast, we're really worried about the survivability of that. So what this has equated to is that over half or 55% of drivers were speeding at the locations where we're proposing interventions, so at those intersections. So that's quite a few. So we would like you to keep that in mind. Also, when we were talking about the types of measures that were available, we also look at the average daily traffic. So the range here was 3,200 to 8,200 vehicles per day. All right, so that helped us to determine, a bit about what is needed. We definitely need some speed mitigation measures and ways to help that, if there is a crash, it's not going to be, where someone's speeding through the intersection and runs through the stop sign, which happens quite often, and hits a pedestrian crossing the street or a bicyclist. All right, so the next slide.
Just gonna pause for a sec, Elisa. Yeah. I just want to remind people that just joined the meeting that if they have questions, please ask those questions through the Q&A section instead of the chat option. So thank you.
Great, yeah. All right, so we did look at crash history as well. And I know some of you can look at this. There are 48 crashes within 5 years along the Neighborway as a whole. This does include major intersections where we are not proposing improvements. So that number seems really high, and it is. So we can see at Penn Avenue, at South Dallas, and at Beechwood. But it is important to look at those crashes in their entirety, because what that tells us is a bit about driving behavior and generally about crash risks in terms of, time of year, time of day, those sorts of things. So we want to look at them holistically. So we do have all of that data, and we did also parse out the data that was sort of in between at those minor intersections to get a sense of what was happening at those. So this helped us to determine if we needed to make some customizations. For example, one thing that I would look at in particular here is, say, the proportion of nighttime crashes, or in particular, the proportion of injury nighttime crashes, to see if there's some sort of lighting change that needs to be made here. Most of these crashes occurred during daylight hours and during daytime, but that just gives you a sense of some of the types of ways that we're using this data. All right, so you can go to the next slide. So here is an overview of the corridor as a whole. So I know some of you are familiar with this graphic, and if you have seen this before, I would like you to note that this has changed. Through the design process, we have to test out a lot of different things. We've also listened to some feedback, and so as a result, some of these designs have changed. For those of you who aren't familiar, this essentially is just an overview of the corridor, and it shows the intersections where we are proposing to make improvements. We're going to go through each of these individually, but as a whole, we're going to make improvements at Gettysburg Street, Hastings Street, South Linden Avenue, South Mertland Avenue, and South Lang. And then there will be, as a whole, some signage improvements and pavement marking improvements throughout the whole corridor. Those aren't included in today's presentation because we wanted to really focus on the geometric changes within those intersections specifically. All right. So we can go to the next slide. All right, so this is the first one, Gettysburg Street. We're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about this one. So this is one where we had originally proposed a traffic circle. That was the original idea. But again, we kind of go through this iterative design process where we have to test this out, make sure it works with all the different types of vehicles, listen to neighborhood feedback about this. During one of our meetings with the business owners in particular, there was some feedback that was provided about the types of vehicles accessing that need to provide deliveries to this. And so, we knew that the traffic circle itself was really not going to be the best solution here. So then what we need to do is determine what other improvements are available within our toolkit that help to provide that same type of safety benefit. So what we proposed here with the curb extensions, this helps to visually narrow the lanes so that it provides a traffic calming impact. It doesn't feel quite so open. And I know that those of you, all of you are local here on the call for the most part, I'm sure, are aware that Gettysburg is a very large intersection. And it's really easy to make fast turns, in particular, if you're on Reynolds Street and heading towards Beechwood, that right, that is currently uncontrolled, and you could go through there quite quickly. Same with the right turns from Reynolds Street turning on to Gettysburg. Due to the radius, you could make that turn quite fast. So this would help to reduce that, sort of formalize this and make it more of a T intersection. So it would slow people's turning speeds. I think it would improve expectancy within the intersection itself, because we're proposing that all three legs be stop controlled. This would also reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians. The more time you're out on the street, the higher your odds are of being hit, or the more your exposure is. So anytime we can reduce the crossing distances, that's always a good thing. So that's the proposal here, is for these curb extensions. I want to talk a little bit about the materials. Because we have heard community feedback. A lot of us are very familiar with curb extensions throughout the city that have the hatched white pavement markings and the reflective delineators. I think some of you call them bollards or stanchions, or there's a variety of names, but you know what I'm talking about. I think the taller plastic edge line delineator for the curb extensions that has a reflective element at the top. I want to make this very clear. We're not proposing that at this location at all. So we won't be including any of those. This does include a white edge line to it. And we have investigated other materials such as concrete. As of right now, there's some issues with drainage that we've been trying to work through. And this is, currently the most feasible option right now. Given the budget, we want to be respectful. There was a lot of feedback provided about wasting money on a project that you all felt was maybe lower need in terms of Reynolds Street safety comparatively. And we think this provides that safety benefit that we want and that this corridor needs, but also respecting that budget does it in a way that's cost conscious. So right now, what we're proposing is a gray paint. So it's a similar color to concrete. And I would like to point to the photo that's on the bottom left corner. You can see that there's a light gray paint used around that location. So it's like a very mild appearance. And it has a double white edge line border to help to define the space. Within that, again, we want to, we need a physical element to this, or else people just drive over those sections. So in light of, or in lieu of providing those reflective delineators, what we would like to propose is to use these planters. These have been used elsewhere in the city and with other agencies, and they could remain up year-round. So they serve as that physical protection, but also provide a beautification opportunity. A lot of you that we've spoken to would like landscaping elements to be part of this, and that allows us to provide sort of that visual beautification for that downtown area that I think we all find so charming. I know that this can be a little bit difficult to see on the aerial. I'd also like to point out too that we are modifying for any of these intersections. If it currently has a crosswalk, that we are modifying those to be a high visibility crosswalk. So if we could go to the next slide, I would like to show you maybe just what a quick schematic could look like for this, to give you a sense. We feel like this is really a low impact but high safety benefit type of project that responds to some of the visual concerns that were brought up before, and still provides sort of an attractive opportunity for beautification within the neighborhood. So the curb extensions that are currently shown, that were shown on the aerial, they are only extending to the current no parking within the intersection. So we're not proposing to remove any legal parking. This will help to just ensure that everyone has really good sight distance as they approach the intersection, to see other oncoming vehicles, but also to see crossing pedestrians and other roadway users. So hopefully this gives you a sense of what this looks like. Again, this doesn't include all the elements. Like for example, this approach would have a stop sign on it. But I just wanted to give you a sense, because I know there was so much concern about what some of these treatments would look like. So to give you a sense of what these curb extensions and planters could look like. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of the visual, at least in terms of the plantings and the curb extension materials. All right, so now with that, I'd like to move on to the traffic circles. So the neighborhood traffic circles, again, these mini traffic circles that we're proposing. So this is the one shown here at Linden. We're going to have pavement markings that are splitter islands leading up to it. The actual traffic circles themselves will have one single outer line on the outside, and then it will be mountable curb on the inside, followed by, it could possibly be planted if that's something that the neighborhood would like to take on, or they could be solid concrete. And I am going to talk about one location where we are strongly considering that due to the crossing guard situation. So this is one location that could potentially be planted if that is something that you all would prefer. Otherwise, I mean, it would essentially be similar to how it is now, and that it's just all pavement through the center of the intersection, except that it would be a raised concrete element in the middle. So what this does to provide safety is that, drivers have to go right around the circle. So you essentially have to go right to turn left. This is a possible maneuver for any personal vehicle. I should note that we are working with different departments throughout the city right now. We have this test out at Euclid, and I'm going to show you some photos of that later. But I know a lot of concerns have been brought up about, how are school buses going to traverse this, or how are emergency vehicles, snowplows, so different vehicles like this. So what we're doing is we're working with all of those departments. We have tested this out through the software, and we are actually physically testing the circles as well with the actual vehicles and the range of vehicle sizes. So that is the nice opportunity that Euclid has provided to us. So we are testing this with school buses, 2 different types of plows, emergency vehicles, working with the trash pickup. Paige, am I forgetting any? Emergency vehicles, I think I mentioned that one. So anyway, I hope you get the point. We are trying this with a lot of different vehicles that have to use this intersection, that we know we need it for our daily function and all of the critical needs, emergency or otherwise. So, rest assured, there is a plan in place for everyone to be able to have the access that is needed. So with that, I hope that gives you a sense of what the scale of this circle and the materials that are used here. So again, you have to turn right to go around the circle. You would be able to, you could make a full U-turn if you'd like. You could make the left turn, anything along those lines. Let's see, am I missing anything else about it, Paige? Oh, I will say the one, the primary safety benefit for this. So I've heard a lot of folks say, not quite entirely sure why this is needed. Again, for those of us who live here locally or live anywhere near a stop sign in the city, I'm sure that you can all attest to the amount of, random vehicles that do run them quite often. And so, we're not talking about, a lot of the residents here, we are all conscientious of safety in our own neighborhood, but there's a lot of other drivers that come to this neighborhood that do not, and will drive straight through this without stopping. So this provides a physical barrier so that vehicles are not able to just, fly straight through the stop signs. So vehicles will have to yield and just follow Pennsylvania laws. There haven't been any issues with people learning how to use these elsewhere from what we found. It's been a very positive research crash benefit. And I'd like to also talk about the one other thing that's been brought up quite a bit is the impact on neighboring streets and volumes. And so, to do our due diligence, because again, none of us want to have the unintended consequence of putting these in and then creating an issue somewhere else, is that we have reached out to agencies that have installed these. We have also looked at published research on this. And, you could say, they're not Pittsburgh, they don't understand Pittsburgh drivers. So this pilot at Euclid, we are also monitoring traffic volumes as well to see, does that relate to Pittsburgh? Are we experiencing the same thing here? And if we're not, then we'll need to go back and look at our design again and, kind of see if there's something else that we need to tweak with it. All right, so I think we can go on to the next intersection. So this is at Mertland. Again, same design here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. Very similar. Each of the sides of the circles is customized to the geometry of the intersection so that we can make sure that it works with vehicle flow. All right, so I think we could go on to the next one. All right, so this is at South Lang, and I want to stop on this one just for a minute here because this is the one where, with the stair at school right there in particular with bus traffic, we're very, want to make sure that we're considering that fully. And so we've been working with Pittsburgh Public Schools and the crossing guards that work at any of the intersections where these are proposed, both on this corridor and elsewhere. We've also tried to look into some other best practices as far as crossing guard operations are concerned. Just make sure, again, that we're doing our due diligence. We want to make sure they have such an important job that they can do it to the best of their ability, and we don't want to impede that in any way. So this is one location where we would propose that this one be a solid concrete circle. So again, it'll look similar to the intersection that's out there now, but have the raised element that's in the center. So the crossing guard will be able to still go and control all of the lanes of traffic from the center of the intersection, just as occurs every other year that she has been out there working at that intersection. Except this time, actually, she'll be raised up a little bit higher and hopefully be even more prominent to drivers on approaching streets. So this is something that we have talked about, and I think we're still working this through, but just as of right now, this is one that we would propose that is concrete fully. All right. So with that, I hope that gives you a sense of some of the design considerations, how that works with the planning process, kind of this iterative process that we have been using to come up with what these designs are, some of the considerations for that. And so with that, I'd like to talk about how we're piloting this, because again, we want to make sure the last thing we want is unintended consequences. We all live here as well and are all concerned about all of our streets and all of our residents. And so, you know, we want to make sure that this design works as best as possible to facilitate safe movement for everyone. So the North Euclid Neighborway project is allowing us to kind of test this out and see if we need to make changes. So I do think that some of you have been out there to test this, and if not, I would encourage you to go out and take a look for yourself. So we've got 4 traffic circles that are in place. We chose different sized intersections. Some are very small, some are larger. These ones have PAT buses through some of them, including articulated buses, and we worked with the Port Authority, you know, on the design and installation of those. And actually, I think that was one of the vehicles that I forgot to mention earlier, is that PAT buses are one that we are also working with, and we know are on half of this corridor as well and have been tested for that. So, so we've gotten feedback from them. So you can see on the photo on the left, that's at North Euclid at Callow Hill. That is at one of the intersections where the PAT buses go through this. Both the traditional size PAT bus and also the articulated both go through this intersection. So some of the data that we're collecting for this is that we are collecting volume data, both on Euclid and also on neighboring parallel streets, to see if any of the traffic is diverted to those streets. We really want to understand if that is an outcome of this. We are looking at speed data as well. And we are also using video footage where you can see that on the bottom right. So we can actually observe the types of behaviors, because, you know, we know that the actual data only tells us so much. We also need to be able to see how people are using it. So right now, everyone's still in the acclimation period. Typically that's actually 3 months, but we're shortening that for this to say, you know, are there tweaks that we need to make to the design right now? I can say that, you know, from what we've seen from the project team we're out there, is that most people are using these circles as intended. One of the changes, you know, we are wanting this to be a responsive process and to learn as we're going. And so some of the feedback that we have heard is that people find the keep right signs confusing, because if they would like to make a left, that feels unclear to them. And so we're testing out a different type of signage as well. And you can see that on the top right to help make it very clear to drivers, you know, to go around the circle if they would like to make a left. So we're going to see how that signage works out as well, and if there's any issues with it. But I hope that gives you a sense of, you know, again, some of the considerations that we use in the design, how we're checking ourselves through this, and just that, you know, this is a needed project to help complete that network to make, you know, safe mobility for everyone throughout the city in a complete network. And you know, that we are being responsive and trying to listen to the feedback that we've heard from you all through this whole process. All right. So that's all I had.
Thank you so much.
Paige, are you going to take it over with the questions?
Yes, I just want to remind before Paige take over the questions really quick. If you haven't submitted the survey, please, we'll share that on the chat box, so you can click on the link, and we're still looking to hear from you. And yeah, we're just going to move over with the Q&A section. Again, if you have comments, add those to the chat option. If you have questions, please ask those on the Q&A section. I understand that, you know, there's around 76 people, and we already have like 60 questions on the queue. So we'll answer as many as we can. And if we, for some reason, cannot answer all your questions, you'll get your answer by email. So just so you know.
To kick it off with questions about the roundabouts, how are roundabouts safer for pedestrians to cross the street than four-way stop signs?
First of all, hello, my name is Paige. I'm on the traffic engineering team at DOMI. I'm going to give my first go at answering some of these questions and call in some of my coworkers to help us out. So talking about the traffic circles and how they improve safety. As Alyssa said earlier, you know, stop signs are, you know, not always used. We've done in surveys that we've done ourselves, of observational surveys, we've seen, you know, less like half of people rolling those stops, and up to 12% in people who just blow through stop signs. So what's exciting about the traffic circles is by creating a vertical obstruction in the middle, they force everyone to slow down and travel around. So using design to enforce that is a lot more reliable than, relying on traffic enforcement for those safety reasons.
Paige, could I add one element to that as well?
Please, yeah.
Part of the feedback that we heard as well is that concern over accessibility of these. And I think that's a valid concern and one that we have all, we take really seriously. So we are working with the disability community to test out some of the designs to see if it works for them, or if they have any concerns, or if there's anything that we could do to help modify the design to meet their needs. But it is currently the crosswalk as currently marked, and crosswalk laws apply just as it would elsewhere, and those would continue even with the traffic circle. So even someone going through the traffic circle would have to yield to a crossing pedestrian.
Yes. And I can piggyback off of what Alyssa is saying. I'm Cassandra Leopold. I am with DOMI as well. I am the new principal planner in charge of active transportation. We are working, luckily, hand in hand with Hillary Roman, the ADA coordinator. We have selected candidates who have been kind enough to go with us to our Euclid Neighborway after we have the initial pilot installed, and we have representatives who deal with vision disability, mobility assistance, people who have worked developing and improving wheelchairs, and also we have secured members of the task force, the city-county task force on disabilities as well. So we want to be as transparent as possible. We want to be considerate of what access means with this new infrastructure, and has been an exciting opportunity to do so.
Thanks for that, Cassandra and Alyssa.
To talk about maneuvering around the roundabouts, there's a little bit of confusion around how vehicles get around. So a question would be, will vehicles move around the traffic circle like one would a full roundabout? Meaning if you're turning from Reynolds left onto Linden, would you bear right at the circle and loop around? And also, will there be sufficient room for delivery trucks around the roundabouts? And data on people turning left on the wrong side of the circle?
Yeah, these are all things we're trying to explore with the Euclid pilot. You do move to the right of the circle, even to all the way around to make a left. The circles will be made of concrete mountable curb. And what that means is that the curb will have a sort of slope to it, so that should larger vehicles need to not be able to navigate that easily, they will be able to mount a couple feet of the curb fairly easily to make that turn, so long as they are moving slowly and safely. So we are not looking to completely restrict access so much as maintain access. Access throughout those intersections is done at safe and slow speeds.
On the topic of education, how will drivers be educated on how to maneuver the traffic circles, and how is education on this new infrastructure being implemented?
So part of the reason of this pilot, we're looking at signage to make sure which signage is the most clear and most legible for this. But we are also looking at other ways that we can do more, increase our outreach. We do think that Reynolds, given that it already has a traffic circle, we are hoping that people have a better understanding, and that we've also heard that some people maybe don't use that traffic circle correctly. So by creating a whole corridor of them, it will create more consistency and become a more predictable corridor. Does anyone else have anything else they'd like to add about outreach we're doing around it? I know we've talked about a lot of ideas of how we can do.
Yeah, I think that this pilot, well, for one thing, we are trying to use intuitive design so that it makes sense. You know, you shouldn't have to read a manual to go up and understand how you're supposed to go through this intersection. But, you know, so I think that one, we are trying to make this as intuitive as possible. And if we still think that there's issues with that, I think we're going to look at other education opportunities. I know that some of the other cities that have done this, and also just other treatments in general, understanding what works to help kind of get that message out is something that we're discussing as well.
Could you talk a little bit about how bus traffic will be handled?
Sure. We are working very closely with the Port Authority. We have a meeting with them next week on the pilot program. And, you know, like us, they recognize that all of their transit users are pedestrians before and after. So they are, you know, eager to see these changes and work with us to try and create safer conditions for their, you know, their clients, the people riding the buses. So we are working very closely with them. You know, we are not, you know, right now we know that there's people that are making lefts on the Port Authority buses over the existing circle, which is a little bit bigger, but, you know, we're taking the existing routes into consideration and working with the Port Authority to make sure that these all work for all the users.
Parking. How many parking spaces will be eliminated on Reynolds Business District by Gettysburg, and would parking spaces be impacted specifically at the Gettysburg-Reynolds intersection?
Sure, yeah. One of our reasons in choosing a Neighborway, as Kim had said earlier, instead of bike lanes, is we did hear a lot of concerns about parking removal. So we have committed to not removing a single legal parking space. Sometimes people park very close up to the intersections, and within 20 or 30 feet of an intersection is considered illegal. And the reason for that is sight lines. It creates a dangerous condition for pedestrians, especially, you know, trying to cross. So we are going to do the Gettysburg bump outs are to increase those sight lines and enforce that rule, that existing Pennsylvania law. But we will not be removing a single legal parking space.
Right, and I wanted to add that impacting those sight lines are also not ADA compliant. It makes it very difficult for someone using an assisted device if someone is parked that close to an intersection illegally. So that's another reason too.
Thank you for that. You said that pylons will not be used at Gettysburg. What about the other intersections on Reynolds?
We are not planning on using pylons at any of the intersections. If you go to the North Euclid pilot, you'll see that we did use them for this pilot project because that is a 1-month pilot, but even those we will be removing and replacing with a better looking, more robust concrete circle.
There are a lot of questions around landscaping, and they, just to go over that, like who will be maintaining landscaping features and who pays for it, and who would maintain like the planters as well as the roundabout features.
Sure, I can start taking this one, and that's so we do not need to provide any landscaping. We have, in our conversations with members of Point Breeze, we have seen an interest in providing that space for that. It would be, we would be relying on the community to maintain the landscaping. We would, I think we would be doing the initial plantings, you know, if that is something that people are interested in. And so far we have gotten feedback that it is something that Point Breeze residents would like, but we would be, you know, it would be up to the community to maintain that landscaping should we provide that beautification opportunity.
I should also, just if I could add one thing to that, because I think maybe, you know, a bit of the elephant in the room is that, you know, what we are proposing for the curb extensions is to use the planters as the physical barrier to help provide protection and to, you know, really define that space so that people can't travel over the pavement markings. And so, you know, if it comes back that the neighborhood is, you know, does not want to maintain those planters there long term, then I think that we'll have to go back to the drawing board and take a look at physical measures that we could use to help provide that element of safety.
Given the going along to the timeline of this project, will there be future meetings given the plans are only at 60% complete?
We have had a few meetings now. At this point, I do not believe there are any further plans to have more meetings. We have gotten, we would still like to have feedback. That isn't, we are opening to feedback, and should we need to follow up with various stakeholders, that's certainly something we are open to. But at this point, I do not believe there are any scheduled.
Could you talk a little bit about how this would affect someone's property, especially regarding this sidewalk usage?
Sure. The entire scope of this project is within the public right-of-way. So none of this should be impacting, will be impacting anyone's personal property. And at this point, I'm thinking about sidewalks. I don't think that the proposal we've just gone over with Alyssa has included any changes to curb lines. So this is all using the public land and the public right-of-way.
If I could add one element to that as well, if, I think people are thinking about maybe in part responsibility and also value. And so, I think that, again, this is in the public right of way. We are, we did hear concerns even about, extending the sidewalk and how, what burden that would place on, the property owners right there. But as of right now, this will all function as the street currently functions. And so the other aspect of this is, when you think about value itself. And so, we did some digging into this to try and see if anyone else has looked into that and sort of quantified it. And from a business perspective, there's a couple of good case studies out there. There's a really good one out there for Golden, Colorado, where it's a series of traffic calming measures and safety measures, and looking at the tax revenue that was generated by those businesses, both before and after, to see if there was a difference. And there was a notable difference. I mean, it was a decent increase. I think there is definitely a case to be made, even anecdotally, for people who feel comfortable and safe within business districts. And we know that there's residences in between those two neighboring districts. But I would also argue that I think residences would have the same thing, that if you want to live in a place where you feel comfortable getting around no matter what mode you choose. And I think that's in part why a lot of us enjoy the Point Breeze neighborhood. And I think this just strengthens that a little bit more.
Could you talk a little bit about traffic volume and how this will impact side streets? So knowing how will you know if traffic volumes change from Reynolds to a side street? Are you currently monitoring volumes of nearby side streets? And what is the plan for addressing increased traffic on neighboring streets should this be the case? And is there a possibility to put traffic calming measures on additional streets in the area?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to let Alyssa start with this one because it's something she addressed a little bit in the presentation, and maybe she can elaborate.
Yeah. So again, this is one of those things that we have read about in the case studies. There are traffic calming measures that do seem to have an impact on traffic volumes, and people do kind of get diverted onto side streets. The ones that we're proposing here specifically for this project, so the curb extensions and traffic circles, have not been found in any documented case studies to have diverted traffic. So there was no impact on traffic volume from those. So what we can tell from that is that it's not, it helps to reduce speeds, but is not so much of an annoyance or a deterrent that it pushes people onto other routes. So they can still get to their destination just as easily as they can today. So, but then to tie that back to Pittsburgh, again, we are tracking the data on Euclid right now to see if there's an impact there. I would say that that's a very comparable neighborhood and route to this one. And I think that we are talking about, for these other, initial neighborways as well, seeing if we also want to collect data on these streets as well. I won't, go so far as to say we're collecting data for every project on that street and all of, and the neighboring adjacent streets, but I think that could be something that we could look at for this one here, because I know that that's a decent concern, and I know that we are all very cognizant of that. So.
I will also say too that, you know, these are living projects, and we are certainly open to, you know, should we see negative repercussions of them, you know, we're certainly open to using, you know, money we have designated for traffic calming and other neighborhood improvements to try and improve this project in the future should we see any of these concerns. We're not going to just install this and then, you know, walk away. We're certainly going to be involved in the community and monitoring this after post-installation.
We are
Paige,
at the,
actually,
oh, go ahead.
oh, just to make sure we fully answered that question, Paige, could you also just maybe elaborate really quickly on the process if someone is interested in traffic calming on their specific street?
Yeah, at this point, we have, if you go into DOMI's website, there is a traffic calming program that we have that involves an application and a petition, and then we collect data afterwards, and that program right now is largely speed humps, but we have, you know, used it to inform other decisions. So the traffic calming program exists now, and our plan is to continue it in the future should it maintain funding, and we've gotten so much positive feedback around it that I think that will be the case. But,
it is at the hour, so the last question I will make about, in general, like, will this presentation, there are questions on this, but like, will the presentation slides be available, and will everybody whose questions did not get answered be answered after this meeting has ended?
Yes, we're gonna after the meeting, we're gonna share like a Q&A you know, section with you guys, so you can see all the questions and answers. I'll be happy to like share the presentation with you guys as well, and I'll send another email maybe tomorrow or on the next days, and I'll also add that call to action for anybody that is interested in maintaining any, you know, green area for the circle. So yeah.
awesome.
But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I understand that we, you know, didn't have enough time to answer all of your questions, but please, if you have other stuff that you want to add into the survey, please do that. If you have other questions, feel free to ask those as well. And we'll document all these questions, and we'll send you your answers via email. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great night. Thank you, team, as well.
Thank you.
Have a great night.